All right, buckle up because we're diving headfirst into brain rot.
Hey, yeah,
You've likely seen the term
rough,
thrown
no,
around, maybe even chuckled at some of the memes, but Oxford Dictionaries just crowned it their word of the year for 2024. Wow. And trust me, this goes in way deeper than the passing internet fad.
interesting.
We're going to break down exactly what brain rot is, explore its fascinating historical roots, and unpack why it's striking such a nerve in today's world. We've got a stack of fascinating sources for this deep dive, everything from Oxford's official announcement to some thought-provoking historical parallels.
It's pretty incredible how a term like brain rot can capture such a complex mix of humor, anxiety, and genuine concern.
Right.
It's like a cultural snapshot of where we are right now in our relationship with technology and information.
Exactly. And that complexity is precisely why we're doing a deep dive. So let's start with the official definition. Oxford defines brain rot as the supposed deterioration of a person's mental or intellectual state, especially from overconsumption of content, particularly online, considered trivial or unchallenging. Basically, the idea is that certain types of content might be rotting our brains.
It's interesting how the definition itself is so carefully worded.
Yeah.
Use also supposed deterioration. Acknowledging that there's still debate and ongoing research, on the actual cognitive impacts. But even the perception of mental decline is powerful, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And get this.
Okay.
Usage of the term brain rot has skyrocketed by 230%, between 2023 and 2024, it'll carry. That kind of jump suggests it's really resonating with people. What are your thoughts on why that might be?
Well, it seems to tap into a very real anxiety about how we're spending our time online and what it might be doing to our minds. It's almost like a collective gasp of, wait a minute, are we losing ourselves in the endless scroll?
And now you mention it, the whole concept isn't actually that new. It might surprise you to learn that the term brain rot first popped up way back in 1854.
1854?
Yeah.
That's long before smartphones and social media feeds.
Yeah.
Where on earth did it come up?
It's from Henry David Thoreau's Walden, which, as Ribbez who haven't read it, is essentially Thoreau's account of ditching the complexities of modern life, even back then, to live simply in a cabin in the woods.
Walden, a classic for a reason.
Right.
Thoreau is deeply concerned with the potential for society to oversimplify, to lose touch with the deeper, more challenging aspects of life. I wonder if he had a premonition of TikTok.
Right. And here's the really fascinating part. Thoreau actually uses the term brain rot to critique society's tendency toward, oversimplification. He writes, while England endeavors to cure the potato rot, will not any endeavor to cure the brain rot, which prevails so much more widely and fatally.
That's an incredible parallel. How, even in the mid-1800s, amidst the Industrial Revolution and societal shifts, there was already this concern about losing the ability to engage with complexity.
Right.
It makes you wonder if this fear of dumbing down is a recurring theme throughout history, just manifested in different ways.
It's like we're hardwired to crave stimulation. And yet, too much of the wrong kind might actually be doing more harm than good. Kind of a paradox, when you say.
Absolutely. And that's where the modern concept of brain rot is really interesting. Because while Thoreau was commenting on societal trends as a whole, today's brain rot is often tied to very specific types of online content, and we've got a whole spectrum to unpack, from the bizarrely entertaining to the potentially harmful.
Okay, let's get into some examples. What kind of content is getting slapped with this brain rot label these days?
There's a fascinating range. On one end, you have things like those Skibidi toilet videos, humanoid toilets singing and dancing. Totally absurd. But somehow racking up billions of views.
You can admit those are strangely catchy. I mean, I can't explain why, but they're oddly compelling.
Exactly. Then you have trends like the "Only in Ohio" meme, where Ohio becomes this mimetic representation of all things bizarre and outlandish.
I think we've all seen those memes, but it's like Ohio became the unofficial state of brain rot content short while. But it's interesting how these trends even begin to shape our language. Skibidi is now almost synonymous with nonsensical, and Ohio has taken on a whole new layer of
A
meaning
fascinating
online.
example of how online culture can actually start to influence language and communication. Yeah, but it also raises the question, is this just harmless fun? Or is there something deeper and potentially more concerning going on? Are we witnessing a
Right.
shift in how we communicate, how we even think, because of this constant exposure to brain rot content?
That's a great question, and that's where I think
Yeah.
we need to start digging a little deeper into the potential downsides of brain rot. Because while some of it might seem harmless on the surface, there's a growing concern about its impact on mental health, particularly for younger generations who've grown up
That's
immersed
a
in this
crucial point.
online
And
world.
to be fair, it's not just about Gen Z. There's a growing awareness across
Right.
all age groups that maybe, just maybe, we need to be more mindful of how we consume information, especially online.
And on that note,
Okay.
I think it's time we shift gears and delve into the potential consequences of brain rot. Because while it might start with harmless memes and catchy tune, the implications for our mental well-being could be far more serious
Absolutely.
than we
And I think it's
realize.
important to approach this with a balanced perspective. We don't want to jump to conclusions
Yeah.
or overstate the risks, but we do need to acknowledge that there are legitimate concerns about how this type of content might be affecting our cognitive ability and mental health.
Well said.
Okay.
So let's get into it. What are some of the potential dangers of brain rot? And are we overreacting? And is there genuine
I think a good
cause
starting
for
point is to
concern?
look at the potential impact on our attention spans. I think a good starting point is to look at the potential impact on our attention spans. There's a growing body of research suggesting that constant exposure to short-form, highly stimulating content can actually rewire our brains to crave novelty and instant gratification.
So basically, we're training ourselves to
Precisely.
get bored more easily.
And that can have ripple effects on our ability to focus on tasks that require sustained attention. Whether it's reading a book, having a meaningful conversation, or even just completing a work assignment. It's like our brains are getting used to snacking on information instead of savoring a full meal.
If we're constantly snacking, we're probably not getting the nutrients we need to thrive, right? Is that where the
Exactly.
mental health concerns
Think
come
about
in?
it. If we're constantly bombarding our brains with superficial content, we're not giving ourselves the mental space to process emotions, reflect on experiences, or engage in deeper thought. And that lack of introspection can contribute to feelings of anxiety, emptiness, and even depression.
It's interesting because some of the content associated with brain rot is designed to evoke strong emotional responses, even if they're fleeting, like those rage videos or those super dramatic reaction compilations. Does that kind of emotional roller coaster play into the mental health
Absolutely.
aspect
It's like we're
as well?
becoming desensitized to genuine emotion because we're experiencing it in such a compressed, artificial way online. And that can make it harder to connect with our own emotions and build healthy relationships in the real world.
It's almost like we're trading depth for speed, and in the process, losing something essential about
That's
what it
a
means
powerful
to be
way
human.
to put it. And it's not just about the emotional impact. There's also concern about the potential effects on critical thinking skills.
Oh, right, because if we're passively consuming information without questioning it, we're essentially letting other people do our
Exactly.
thinking for
And
us, aren't we?
in a world where misinformation and propaganda are rampant, that's a dangerous path to go down. Critical thinking is essential for
Yeah.
navigating the complexities of the digital age. And if we're not actively engaging those mental muscles, we become more susceptible to manipulation and less equipped to make informed decisions.
So it's not just about the quantity of information we're consuming, but also the quality and how we're engaging with it. Seems like the key takeaway here is to be more intentional
I couldn't
about our
agree more.
online habits.
It's not about demonizing the internet or swearing off social media entirely. It's about finding a balance that works for you and making conscious choices about how you spend your time online.
So what can people do to combat brain rot? Are we doomed to become mindless zombies glued to our screens, or is there hope for
There's
reclaiming our
definitely
mental
hope.
clarity?
And the good news is that there are a lot of practical things people can do to protect their mental health in the digital age. One strategy that's gaining traction
Yeah, I've
is the
heard about
concept
that.
of a
But
digital
isn't it a
detox.
bit extreme to completely disconnect? I mean, the internet is such a huge part of our lives.
I
now.
understand that concern. Yeah, and a full-blown digital detox might not be feasible or even desirable for everyone. But the idea is to intentionally carve out time away from screens and engage in activities that nourish your mind and body. It could be anything from going for a walk in nature to reading a book to having a face-to-face conversation with a friend. The key is to give your brain a break from the constant stimulation and allow it to reset.
That makes sense. It's like giving your brain a chance to breathe and process everything it's taken in.
Exactly. And even small changes can make a big difference. Something as simple as turning off notifications on your phone, setting time limits for social media apps, or designating screen-free zones in your home can help you regain control of your digital consumption.
Those are great tips. And speaking of regaining control, another strategy I've heard about is media literacy. Essentially training yourself to be more discerning about the content you consume and the sources you trust.
Media literacy is absolutely crucial in today's information landscape. It's about developing the skills to critically evaluate information, identify biases, and distinguish fact from fiction. It's like having a mental filter that helps you sift through the noise and focus on what's truly valuable.
So instead of passively absorbing whatever pops up on our feeds, we need to actively engage with the information we're consuming and ask ourselves, is this credible? Is this helpful? Is this aligning with my values?
Exactly. And that kind of critical thinking can be applied to all types of content, from news articles to social media posts to even those catchy brain rot videos. It's about becoming an active participant in the digital world rather than a passive consumer.
It's empowering to realize that we have more control than we might think. We don't have to be victims of the algorithm or feel powerless in the face of information overload.
Absolutely. And the more we cultivate these skills of digital literacy and mindful consumption, the more we can reclaim our mental clarity and harness the power of technology for good.
I love that perspective. It's not about rejecting technology. It's about using it in a way that supports our well-being and helps us thrive.
Exactly. And I think that's a message that resonates particularly with younger generations. They're often portrayed as being glued to their screens and susceptible to brain rot. But in reality, they're often the ones leading the charge when it comes to promoting digital well-being and advocating for a more mindful approach to technology.
That's a great point. And it actually ties back to something Caspar Graf Hall, president of Oxford Languages, said about the choice of brain rot as word of the year. He pointed out that it reflects a certain level of self-awareness, particularly among Gen Z and Gen Alpha, about the potential downsides of the digital world they've inherited.
That's fascinating. It suggests that these generations who've grown up immersed in technology are actually quite astute at recognizing its potential pitfalls. They're not just blindly consuming content, they're starting to critically examine its impact on their lives and advocate for change.
It's almost like they're saying, hey, we get it, this stuff can be fun and addictive, but we also know it's not all sunshine and rainbows. We need to be smarter about how we use it.
Exactly. And that kind of critical awareness is essential for navigating the ever-evolving digital landscape. It's not about fearing technology. It's about understanding its power and wielding it wisely.
So maybe instead of viewing brain rot as a death sentence for our minds, we should see it as a wake-up call, a prompt to be more intentional about our digital habits and reclaim our mental sovereignty.
I couldn't agree more. It's a reminder that we have the power to shape our relationship with technology rather than letting it shape us.
That's a great point to end on. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your perspective on something that struck me as we were diving into all of this research. It's the idea that maybe brain rot isn't a purely modern phenomenon, that perhaps it's always been a part of the human experience, just manifesting in different ways throughout history. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a really insightful observation, and I think there's definitely some truth to it. Humans have always been drawn to novelty and stimulation. We've always had our ways of seeking out easy entertainment, whether it was gossiping around the village well or indulging in sensationalized stories in the newspaper.
Wait, it's like our brains are wired to seek out information. Sometimes the easiest, most readily available information isn't always the most nourishing.
Exactly. And the internet has simply amplified that tendency by providing an endless stream of content tailored to our individual preferences. It's like a giant buffet of information. And it's easy to overindulge in the sugary treats without even realizing it.
So maybe the key to combating brain rot isn't necessarily about avoiding all forms of easy entertainment, but rather about cultivating a more balanced diet of information and experiences both online and offline.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Yeah. It's about finding that sweet spot between indulging in the occasional guilty pleasure and nourishing our minds with content that challenges us, inspires us, and helps us grow.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time we shift gears and explore one final and perhaps the most intriguing aspect of brain rot, the language itself. Because as we've seen, this term has taken on a life of its own, evolving from a somewhat obscure phrase coined by Thoreau to a viral sensation that's shaping how we talk about, well, our very brains. It almost feels like brain rot itself is a case study in how language evolves in the digital age. It's simultaneously serious and silly, insightful and ironic.
It's fascinating, right?
Yeah, how can a term be so powerful yet so lighthearted? Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's catchy and easily spreadable, but it points to this deeper anxiety about the state of our minds in the digital world. It really does. It's like we're laughing at ourselves, even as we're expressing genuine concern. And that self-awareness, that ability to find humor in our own struggles, maybe that's a sign that we're not totally succumbing to brain rot.
Right.
Maybe it's a defense mechanism.
Yeah, maybe.
A way to cope with the overwhelming nature of the digital landscape.
I think there's something to be said for that. Humor can be a powerful tool for processing difficult emotions and navigating complex issues.
Right.
And in a way, the very act of naming and memifying brain rot could be a sign that we're not passively accepting it, we're actively engaging with it, even if it's through satire and self-deprecation.
Yeah, it reminds me of how Gen Z uses humor to talk about mental health.
Oh, yeah.
They're much more open about their struggles with anxiety and depression, but they often do it through memes and dark humor.
Yeah.
It's like a way to destigmatize these issues and make them more approachable.
I think that's a really important point. Humor can be a way to build community, to connect with others who share similar experiences.
Yeah.
And in the context of brain rot, it might be a way for people to say, hey, I'm feeling this too. I'm not alone.
Exactly.
So it's not necessarily a bad thing.
So maybe the takeaway here isn't to avoid all content that might be labeled as brain rot, but rather to be mindful of our consumption habits and to cultivate a healthy sense of humor about the whole thing.
Exactly. They're about finding balance. Recognizing that even the silliest, most mind-numbing content can have its place in a healthy media diet, as long as it's not the only thing we're consuming.
Yeah.
And if we can laugh at ourselves along the way, all the better.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I have one final slightly provocative question for you to ponder. Do you think you'd experienced brain rot? And if so, is it something to worry about or just a natural part of being human in the digital age?
That's a great question, and one that I think we should all be asking ourselves. Maybe the first step to curing brain rot is simply recognizing its existence in our own lives and being honest about how our digital habits might be affecting us.
And maybe, just maybe, the answer isn't about finding its cure, but rather about embracing the absurdity of it all and finding ways to thrive in a world where brain rot is just another part of the human experience.
It's a reminder that even in the face of technological advancements and cultural shifts, the human spirit remains resilient, adaptable, and perhaps even a little bit silly.
So until next time, stay curious, stay mindful, and maybe embrace a little bit of that rot every now and then. Yeah. After all, where's the fun without a little bit of absurdity?